Pork prices, Hong Kong protests, and China turned 70 this week on China Update. What's up everybody, it's Tony here with another China Update where we try and help you guys keep on top of the biggest trends coming out of the world's #2 economy. Let's jump right in. This week, China turned 70 years old, or to be more specific, the People's Republic of China. It was in Beijing on October 1st where Chairman Mao Zedong announced the founding of the People's Republic of China. Little piece of trivia for you guys, 1949 was also the year that the Soviet Union detonated its first successful nuclear weapon. So 49 was a very stressful year for US policymakers. Now there has been a lot of reporting on the 70-year anniversary and the military parade that was conducted in Beijing. But for our purposes here, the most important thing we need to know about the story is the hardware that was on display. Now, one of the best stories that gives an in-depth analysis into what was on display was by Andrew Erickson in the National Interest. Erickson says, Paramount leader Xi Jinping just presided over the largest, most impressive military parade in the history of the world. The occasion to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which just exceeded the Soviet Union's lifespan by 1 year. The bottom line, missiles, missiles, and more missiles. Arguably today's biggest single statement for foreign consumption, literally backstopping the entire parade, was China's debut of the DF-41 solid-fueled road mobile intercontinental ballistic missile, China's newest, most powerful, and arguably most advanced nuclear weapons system. The DF-41 has clearly been designed and deployed with deterring the United States in mind. It is described as a cornerstone of China's nuclear weapons power. Okay, our next story is pork prices in China. Yes, pork prices in China. Now guys, this is a big deal. In my view, the pork situation could have a greater detrimental effect to the Chinese economy than the China-US trade war has. Why? The Chinese consumers are the largest consumers of pork in the world. China accounts for about 50% of global pork production and about 50% of global pork consumption. The current prices of fresh pork are about 80% higher than they were at this time last year. And according to the Ministry of Agriculture, pork inflation is increasing by double digits every month. This is going to have an effect not just on commodity price increases within China itself, but commodity traded around the world. The Chinese are going to open up their markets to foreign meat, particularly pork. The Chinese have already announced that they are going to remove the tariff that they had on US pork, which would be good for US farmers, and it will help alleviate some of the supply side issues that the Chinese are having. Remember that this issue is a direct result of an outbreak of African swine fever, which was first reported in China in the northeast in August of last year. Now, some reports are showing that up to 40% of Chinese pork reserves have been reduced. That's over 100 million pigs. The Chinese government have delegated this as a key political task. They've also ordered state media to manage public opinion on this. So going forward, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have reliable information from state sources and from Chinese media when it comes to pork supply. The Chinese government want to fix this as soon as possible because they recognize pork supply stability as a key factor in maintaining social stability. In fact, pork is so important to the CCP that they have a strategic pork reserve, which they have used to alleviate some of the pressure that has come on based on the supply side issue with very, very limited success. Best case scenario, if African swine fever is controlled, you will only see a return to pre-crisis levels of pork supply in about 12 to 14 months. That is going to mean a very, very busy year going forward for those in Beijing who are in charge of managing this political task. Remember, this is going to have an effect on international commodity prices as the Chinese import more pork and other meats to compensate for the shortage that they are now facing. Chinese have a large and growing middle class, which means they have the purchasing power to pay those higher prices and bid them away from other pork consumers overseas. That means prices go up. However, China also has massive wealth disparity, which means there is going to be tremendous social pressure put on poorer parts of the country where people simply cannot afford to purchase their base protein for the week. It is also worth pointing out that Hu Chunhua, The Vice Premier of the People's Republic of China pointed out that the current shortfall that the Chinese are now facing is bigger than the entire international pork commodity market. That means that every single pig that is sold, every single piece of pork that is sold in the international commodity market does not even equal the shortfall that the Chinese are now facing. So this is going to be tricky for the government to balance going forward. But keep your eyes on this, guys. Pork prices, important stuff. Okay, our next story is Hong Kong. This is an ongoing story, so we'll give you a quick Hong Kong update. At the beginning of the week, the SAR government announced a ban on wearing masks, which just angered the protesters further. This coming hot off the heels of a live shot that was fired at a protester hitting their left arm. This weekend represented another weekend of protests. As of the filming of this video, the subways have been closed for 4 days. Every single subway has been closed for 4 days. Now, based on my anecdotal conversations with journalists on the ground, it seems that the overwhelming public support is still behind the overall protest movement. Recent polling would also support this position. Now, Hong Kong is ongoing, and we will continue to provide updates as they occur. Now, speaking of updates, let's talk about the trade war update. Do we have a trade agreement around the corner? Well, it is certainly not a game that I want to bet on. Over the last year, it has been nearly impossible to try and call whether the Chinese and the Americans will come together with the trade agreement. The last week, we haven't seen any developments because China has been on holiday. But the Commerce Ministry did announce that Liu He was going to lead a trade delegation to meet in Washington to discuss a potential ceasefire. Now, there are reasons to be hopeful that we will get at least an interim sort of agreement. The Trump administration is becoming increasingly concerned at the behavior of the stock market. We've seen about 3 weeks of decline in the stock market on the back of poor US manufacturing data. The Chinese themselves are also facing some issues at home, not just with things like the pork prices and the issues in Hong Kong, but also consumption is down and they want to get that back up. So having some sort of interim agreement could be useful, and there is demand on both sides. However, in saying that, this is very, very difficult to call. Some of those larger systemic sort of changes that the US administration wants to see China implement would be nearly impossible to agree upon in the short term. So any interim agreement would be very narrow in scope. We will have an update next week with how the talks are progressing, but we need to keep an eye out on this next delegation in the middle of this month between Liu He and the American side. Okay guys, our last story is very, very important as well. The RMB, the yuan, this is the currency of the People's Republic of China. Now, over a month ago now, the Chinese currency hit a new low of 7 RMB to 1 USD, or 7 RMB to the US dollar. This was recognized as a so-called psychological barrier that the Chinese were very unlikely going to allow their currency to reach. When this first happened, the Trump administration accused the Chinese of currency manipulation. There was a slew of stories discussing whether the Chinese were devaluing their currency in order to sidestep the effects that tariff increases were having on their goods, basically keeping their currency lower to be competitive in the US market and keep selling to American consumers. In fact, the Chinese had seen a reduction of about 15% in the value of the RMB against the greenback from about March last year, around the time the tariffs were first introduced against the Chinese, to till about August of this year. However, most commentators agree that if there is manipulation going on, the Chinese state is not trying to keep their RMB low, but high. If you look at the situation, there are many capital controls in place. The Chinese have had a longer term policy of trying to ensure stability in the RMB. There was an issue in 2015 and 16 where you saw capital flight, and the Chinese had to use over $1 trillion of their US reserves to reverse that and stabilize the currency. It seems to me very, very risky to risk going back into that situation and opening up all the potential risk and the destabilizing effects a currency reduction or a currency depreciation would have, simply to try and sidestep tariffs that can easily be raised again by the US administration. To me, at the very least, I believe, and I wrote this over a month ago in one of my articles for anyone who follows me, follows my blog, I argued that the Chinese are most probably trying to keep their currency strong, but are struggling to do so because of the external pressure coming from the US and the internal pressure on their economy. So keep your eye on the RMB. I believe that it's going to continue to slide down. The Chinese are trying very desperately to keep it at its current relatively strong level. Okay guys, that's it. That's our China update for the week. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this information helped you guys get a better handle on the Middle Kingdom, the second largest economy in the world. This is a new series that we've started to try and deliver the most important macro trends coming out of China to you guys. If you watch this, you should know the most important things coming out of China. We have links to all the stories that you can look into below. If you like our content, please subscribe and hit that bell button so then when we release this, you'll get this content and you'll have the most up-to-date update on China. Please just give us a comment and let us know what sort of content you want to see, the style that we're doing. We're still experimenting with the format here. What sort of changes would you like to see? Let us know and we can incorporate that into future videos. Okay guys, we'll see you next week. Add oil.